welcome to the Deep Dive podcast. Today I want to talk a little bit about the origin of psychedelic mushrooms. A little bit of the story of the Toltec and essentially how they used them traditionally, and maybe exploring a little bit more into, just what they are and what they're being used for now, and for those who don't know, and just maybe some discussion around that. So, the Toltec, they were an indigenous group of people who lived around the 12 to 1300s in the areas now known as the Oaxaca region of Mexico. So their wisdom extended onto different tribes, but some of the more well-known Toltec wisdom comes in the form of the Four Agreements. So for those of you who don't know, you can look up the Four Agreements, and there's a lot of interesting wisdom packaged into those four concepts, but I want to focus on the traditions of the Toltec in the way that they used psilocybin mushrooms in ceremony as a means of contacting different spirits through the Ghost Dance. It's a book written by Michael Stuart. It talks a bit about the use of the Ghost Dance in ceremony, which also used psilocybin mushrooms to allow various different tribes to also access the land of the dead, and sometimes to perform this Ghost Dance in a way that would communicate with different gods, for instance Quetzalcoatl. So this actually focuses a little bit more into the tale of one Richard Schultes. So Richard Schultes was a botanist from America who was sort of assigned to go check out the Oaxaca mountain region, and I guess he was told about the ceremonial use of a type of sacred mushroom, and this was the psilocybin mushroom. And at this time, this would have been in the Sierra Mazateca sort of general region, and at this point he would have met Maria Sabina, who's also sort of somewhat well known for her wisdom, and she is a practicing Toltec shaman who lived in the Oaxaca mountain regions of Mexico at this time in the 1970s. She would have been very old at that point, and she'd been, passing the lineage of the Toltec and the traditions of working with the psilocybin mushroom in this way were passed down to her through her ancestors. So at this time now is the Mazatec. There were a lot of different tribes again in that area, but the Mazatec were the ones to which Richard Schultes came into contact with, where Maria Sabina was the practicing essentially facilitator. And you can see this scene where Richard Schultes is being essentially anointed into some basement, and they have all these candles, beeswax candles lit, and the mushrooms are then covered in honey so that they could consume them easily, and they would consume quite a bit of the psilocybin mushrooms. And from there, a copal incense is lit, and this is used to cleanse the mushrooms. And once the last candle is blown out, this takes them into a total darkness where they would sing medicine songs, helping contact the spirit of the mushroom, which is referred to by the Toltec as the Little Ones. And from here, it would be quite an interesting experience. So Richard Schultes claimed to even, through this process, being guided through this process by Sabina, contacted his mother, who just recently had passed. And it's one of the potential uses of this mushroom was to contact the dead ancestors, and deviating a little bit from the traditional use of using the ghost dance. So he didn't use a ghost dance or anything. He was just in the basement. And wow, I'm still trying to figure out what it would have been like to have been him in that situation, and returned to your home, and returned to America and your superiors and all that, and to report this type of trip, this type of facilitated ceremonial experience, which was unlike anything that at the time was understood, especially around just eating a mushroom. So at this point, this is in the 70s. Mushrooms were just starting to kind of hit the circuit, so to speak. And Timothy Leary, out of his position of professor at Harvard, kind of got wind of this type of experience that Richard Schultes had experienced. Told his friend Richard Alpert, which is the man whom transitioned through his own spiritual process into Ram Dass. And so there was clearly this ripple effect of certain people whom were also having these types of spiritual experiences, but the vast majority understood that these mushrooms were sort of demonized. And well, I mean, that's quite a different perspective. The Western perception of these mushrooms being this dangerous drug or narcotic, as it was sort of coined by Richard Nixon. The reality being that they weren't dangerous, not near to the level to which they were just demonized as or perceived as. And what happened in the spirit of the little one, really, what happened to the traditional use, what happened to the ways of the Toltec and the way they honored and revered this plant medicine, this teacher. They actually talked about how there was a different type of mushroom. They called it sort of the white man's mushroom. That was the one we're familiar with, that out of Oaxaca, Mexico. So it was grown out of cow dung, and this was the one that was typically experienced. But there was a different type of mushroom that grew native to the cloud forest, which was close to the Oaxaca mountain region, adjacent to. And in this particular cloud forest, this is where the traditional mushrooms that were used by the Toltec in their ceremonies were protected. And up until, the point where there were colonizers, essentially, these mushrooms were plentifully grown and harvested for ceremonial use. And then we hit this point where the rubber industry comes in, and they destroy the cloud forests, changes the ecosystem, and they are no longer able to harvest these mushrooms for ceremony. And what a change. What a pivot. The going from having these plentifully provided sacraments that could access these different dimensions to, still quite a profound experience, I can imagine, but really had a different connotation or a different function. And where does that leave us? With understanding the mushroom, with our ability to sort of connect with the higher energies or different dimensions, maybe something similar to the way Terence McKenna describes going into a heroic dose. And so I think it's also interesting if you think about where we're moving forward, where we're going with using psychedelic mushrooms. And you don't have to look too far to see, Paul Stamets working with these types of mushrooms that help heal the ecosystem. So that actually feels almost reminiscent of repairing the damage that we as colonizers initially put upon, you know, the pressure and the damage and the damage to the rainforests and the damage to the cloud forests, and maybe there's a degree to which we can heal these protected ecosystems in a way that will allow us to cultivate the right mushrooms. Maybe we're past that. Maybe it's not worth looking back to what was, but there's also an excellent book called Entangled by Merlin Sheldrake. It discusses this interesting philosophy, the philosophy around mycelial networks, and how they're essentially this advanced intelligence that, well, as we know, they're an ancient life form that have sort of had their ways of interacting with humans and animals for a very long time. But this would propose that there's just another phase to which the psychedelic mushrooms are also just an advanced intelligence, and they will impact our sort of overall social system in a way that benefits mushrooms. The terrifying comparison would be the carpenter ant, or essentially the mushroom that takes sort of hold of the carpenter ant, and the spores grow inside them, and they can kind of control their brains, and it's a really, really terrifying story. But the point would be that the mushrooms, through the again release of spores, and through their capacity to impact us emotionally and psychologically, and the way that sort of trickles down to, you know, impact the climate, which in turn might grow more mushrooms, or maybe could infect our microbiome in ways that is more, I guess, harmonized with the mushrooms and the way they want to express, or is more ideal for us to have an expression of their experience. Yeah, it almost feels like you can sort of see this intelligence playing out in different subtle ways that might not become so subtle over time. You know, psychedelic renaissance, really having the psilocybin mushroom at the forefront. When you have social movements that spear drive the cultivation and sustainability of a particular species, you know, be it a plant or a mushroom or fungi or whatever, it really kind of just makes you consider their role in our future society. It could be realistically that we're moving towards a point where it's normalized to take mushrooms, not just a microdose, but maybe it will be as well, but taking them with more of an intention of using that connectivity that is naturally a part of the spore's process of co-communicating amongst itself. So I kind of like the metaphor of like, it's like the internet. You know, we look to this type of decentralized communication process, like a mycelial grid. Well, what will mushrooms be to a more advanced species? Will they become something of like a spiritual internet that allows us to communicate with different energetic frequencies or beings, whatever, what have you, in the ways that Terence McKenna kind of talks about communicating with machine elves? Like they're, you know, it's not like a type of communication that we would liken to just a conversation. Would be kind of almost like symbols being telepathically projected into your mind or your mental state. And yeah, so maybe there'd be a more procedural way of going about that process. And this is where I see that maybe the ceremony would come back into play. So what happens if we're able to understand the ideal sort of, I guess, climate for mushrooms to grow them in a way where their genetics are, I guess, more capably understood, and then our microbiomes, maybe you diet or something similar to like drinking ayahuasca, you diet in a way that will allow you to communicate with them in the most, I guess, efficient way, and then you would use a type of ceremony, maybe similar to the way the Toltec did, through movement, through music, through intentional ceremony. And then it really just blows your mind when you think about the quote-unquote ancient technologies that the Toltec applied, and the degree of precision that they would have to have, I guess, just acquired to be able to really communicate through the using the psilocybin mushroom. And I think we're familiar with plant technologies being quite advanced, and I'm just kind of alluding to the fact that we're going to have to find a way for us to use those technologies in a way that's more advanced than what we're currently doing, because as we advance as a species, we'll have these more nuanced ways of applying certain technologies. And I basically am just saying the mushrooms are that one of those technologies. So a little bit about the Toltec, a little bit about sort of how mushrooms sort of ease their way into our civilization, but they certainly will have some sort of role, and just like to say, have an open mind with regard to what that might be. So thanks for checking in, and have an awesome day.